Um, Good morning, everyone. Just a bit of housekeeping. Most of you know me. I'm Sarah Paris, Inspire Manager at the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. Some housekeeping, if I can ask you to keep your microphones on mute so as we don't get everybody's faces popping up on screen. There is a chat box, so you can introduce yourselves to each other via chat. And also, please do ask questions through that means. So each speaker can either pick up on them after their presentation and answer directly. The session is being recorded for both posterity and to be shared with our wider membership and our policy team. So how did this come about? This is continuing in the series of our property forums, which are roughly quarterly. I thought about a topic, a return to the office. And because I'm Reading based, I know that there are several large firms in the region who are downsizing their offices, Thames Water being one of them, moving to more of a hot desking, do we need everyone in at the same time culture. But even pre-pandemic, there were some large accountancy firms who were based on out-of-town business parks, who were taking serviced offices, I think you'd call them, or co-working spaces in town centres to attract and retain possibly younger staff, because they've got potentially more opportunities for a variety at lunchtime, or you've forgot your dad's birthday present, you can shop, which isn't entirely possible on an out of town business park. So and also they weren't necessarily drivers either. So the town centre working gives an opportunity for people to use public transport, which also then enters a whole different realm. Is it better for the environment? I won't talk about the government's drive to net zero because they've got other things going on today. But it also occurred to me that within, as retail outlets, retail centres are downsizing. And again, I can only speak for Reading because I'm Reading based, but the loss of Debenhams, for instance, and walking down the main high street, the empty spaces above things like John Lewis and various other shops. So it could be fulfilling the sustainability agenda on various fronts. I'm not an expert, which is why I have my great speakers today who are experts, who can discuss what impact that might have either on town centres, transport, infrastructure, and the cost per square metre of office space, and the future of work, I suppose, in 2023. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my first, Mr. Scott Witchells, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and taking the seat. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And yes, if you haven't heard the news, our Prime Minister is out, so there's something to kick us off. Good news for most people, I think. So I'm Scott Witchells. I'm Director of Transport and Infrastructure at Stantec. We're a global development and infrastructure consultancy, so we essentially build all of the infrastructure and the buildings and the spaces that enable communities to evolve and develop. And we say we design with community in mind. It's not our job to create communities, that's the job of the people who live there, and they take a long time to establish. But what we try to do is enable that by putting the right infrastructure in the right places with the right quality, and then those communities will emerge and behaviours will emerge to hopefully create great communities of the future. Sustainability is a key part of our approach to design. We're part of the Terra Carta, so we have a commitment to both achieving net zero as a business and also helping all of our clients achieve net zero. So that includes government, local authorities and major developers. So although there's some exciting news today, I don't really want to remind you of this, but I want to take you back to March 20, the the first lockdown of the pandemic, because there's a lot in that we can learn from. Dreadful as it was, it taught us a lot about how places could work in the future and how change could happen if people had that common goal. Of course, the first reaction, it was lockdown, everybody stay at home. Nobody really knew what to do. Some couldn't lock down, they had to continue to work, you know, train and bus drivers, bin collections, that sort of thing. It had to continue, but for others, especially those in my environment, office-based staff, we were just at home. So we had to think about, well, what do we do next? And what happened is new ways of working evolved. They were imposed, but they started to evolve. So we saw rapid moves to enable the IT systems that we were using to cope with this new world. And that hadn't happened before. There was a slow uptake of that sort of system. The other thing was we were very nervous and scared about what might happen. So there was a fear factor in what we were doing. So we were kind of scared to go out and go shopping and meet people. In fact, we were told not to. And things like, even for those that had to travel, buses and trains became no-go zones because you were just told, you know, don't go there, you'll spread the virus. But actually, the interesting part for me about this was the fact that we very, very quickly adapted to becoming quite productive and quite useful at home. And for years and years, certainly in my profession, in transport and infrastructure, we're trying to get more use out of the existing infrastructure we've got. And I used to say to people, look, imagine if every day you came to work was like the traffic you get on a school holiday. You just breeze in and you breeze home. There's no congestion. And for years, we were trying to get business to adopt a home working policy or strategy, or even car sharing schemes to say, look, if just in 1 in 5 days people did something different, they either car shared or work from home, the traffic would be like the school holidays all the time. But we just couldn't get this to bite. And it's challenging because this is about quite comprehensive behavior change. So pandemic was awful, but one of the positives that came out of it is this change in attitude and change in approach. Other things like boosting sales of garden rooms are quite interesting. But what that tells me is the importance of lifestyle, space, quality, and a move towards well-being. And I think that's some of the things that are now being taken forwards into creation of new office spaces, office environments. So the other thing that happened, as you might expect, was a big drop in travel and a big drop in energy use. So both good for the environment, good for reductions in carbon. Congestion and emissions are a big problem for us in towns and cities. So we saw immediate benefits there. And those are actually knock-on cost savings for businesses. Is the health benefits delivered, cleaner, quieter environments mean that people feel better, they feel happier, and that makes them more productive, and they're off sick less often. So there's a whole load of benefits to businesses and employers that come from those changing environments and changing ways of doing things. And then, of course, the overall reduction in carbon, it's got to be good. We have a climate emergency. Everybody knows we are in a pickle, and we've got to do something about this. And we could see what we could do, albeit in extreme circumstances. I used to sadly monitor the lockdown travel data to see what people were doing as things evolved. And what happened is you saw a lot more recreational activity where people were going out just to the nearest park to have a bit of a break, to have a walk, to get some air, to get out of their lockdown space. But then, unfortunately, what happened is we started to open up and to release travel restrictions. The rapid uptake in car trips started to appear. And in parallel, you'd seen this devastating impact on public transport use because people were still concerned about sharing those spaces, about the spread of the virus. And that led to service cuts. So although we're trying to encourage people to travel more sustainably, you can't do that if you're cutting services. You need to increase services and have better quality, better frequencies. One of the benefits, of course, is operators are now much more aware of health risks. So if you do happen to travel by bus or train, you will find they are much cleaner than they used to be, which makes them more attractive. But overall, we've taken a big step back in public transport use. But having said that, we've seen a bit more willingness for people to get out there and walk and to cycle around. So getting people to try different ways to get around has been really powerful in all the things that happened over the last couple of years. And in terms of creating new spaces in towns and cities, if you think about the travel hierarchy you're trying to achieve, if you want better, cleaner environments and quieter spaces, we want people to walk and cycle as their first way of getting around, and including things like micromobility, e-scooters, e-bikes, then into public transport, then maybe sharing taxis and cars, with single occupant car vehicles as the last resort, because we want these great places, and you just don't want them filled up with traffic and gridlock. So the other big change, and since we've released lockdown and people are coming back to work, my own business, we now, people are pretty bored of working from home. They want that social interaction. So we've started to move towards people need to come in 2 or 3 days a week. We're into a flexible working arrangement, but we've also seen changing expectations from staff. So they want to be given more flexible approaches to running and managing businesses. So businesses that want to stay ahead need to offer that flexibility now and consider how they can implement it. There's a lot more focus now on ESG strategies and policies within businesses. And those are starting to drive some of these changes. And as I said earlier, we started to consider our own mental health and well-being because of the lockdown, and that's rolling through into business now. The importance of looking after your staff and wellness campaigns and well-being. We're seeing space planning and space design and building design take that into account. We've seen the emergence of something called the Well Building Standard. So this isn't just about energy use, energy efficiency, reducing carbon. This is about the healthiness of a building. Is it a healthy place to work? And part of that is about the quality of the space, the cleaner air, the different uses in there, the opportunities to move around. The other thing we're seeing is that public transport is slowly recovering, and it will eventually get back to where it was. But what we needed it to be ahead of where it was already. So we've got a lot of work to do. And government, as Sarah mentioned earlier, government's pushing a lot of things out to achieve net zero, including a rapid shift to electric cars. Yeah, great for local emissions, but not the solution, not the long-term solution. Still reliant on electricity. We're still running on 30 to 40 to 50% carbon fuels, which charge them up. They still have emissions, even though they don't have a tailpipe, and they've got a massive carbon footprint in production. And worst of all, they still cause traffic congestion. So it's not the solution. We've got to do something better for our towns and cities. I think what we can expect going forwards is we've got to learn from both the pandemic and the messages from the climate emergency and the measures that we're seeing. The recent IPCC report was pretty negative. We're off track. We're not going to get there if we carry on the way we are. But on a positive note, what they said is the future is actually about our towns and cities. That's the place where we can make the biggest change. And I think that's where we need to think more about good place design, good building design, good accessibility. And something that's been emerging, it's been around a long time actually, and it is what we all used to do hundreds of years ago, is something called the 20-minute neighborhood. And I think this is where the emergence of more flexible spaces and uses within towns and cities are really going to help. So what the 20-minute neighborhood means, as you might expect, is that you can pretty much do what you need to do in your lifestyle and choice within a 20-minute walk. So you can get to the local shops, you can get to your job, healthcare, leisure facilities. In order to do that, we need high quality, safe spaces and work environments. So something Sarah mentioned earlier is that the demand for office space has reduced. So we're seeing a big change in the way offices are designed, thinking more about mix of uses within the same building, using the office space more efficiently, taking the flexible working factors into consideration. And in new developments, you're seeing actually integrating other things within office parks, not just the office environment where you've got to travel to do other things. But those used to be called town centres. So we've got to focus back on how we make town centres better, how we attract people back. In Reading, there's lots going on. You've got the huge development of Station Hill, where it's perfectly placed right by a transport hub. All the amenities are nearby. But the interesting thing about that is it's not an office development. It's a new community. It's got residential in there. It's got shops in there. It has got offices in there. So we're seeing changes in design, changes in concept, changes in mix of uses in planning. So developers will start to build and redevelop high quality, safer spaces and work environments. The other thing I think we've got to do is be bolder about the places. We're still a car dependent society. We're still wedded to that that dream of everyone owning and driving a car. But younger generations are seeing a different future. They're saying, well, I don't want to spend all my money on a big lump of metal that sits outside doing nothing 90% of the time. I've got better things to do with my money. So lifestyles and choices are changing. I think we need to be bolder to make those changes happen within our towns and cities. Things like the Barcelona super blocks, where they're taking the grid of streets, they're taking every block of one street and they're emptying out 2 streets, so it's only every 3rd street you can drive down, to create these high quality super blocks where there's no traffic. We need to be bolder. Places like Oxford have tried low traffic neighbourhoods, but huge objection to them. And to be fair, they're sticking to their guns. But we've got to bring the public with us on this. If we want to create these environments, we've got to remind them of how actually everyone raved about how quiet it was, how clean the air felt, how nice it was to get out and not have to dodge the traffic. And it was all about improving health and well-being. And I think that's the key thing we've got to do. We've got to be bold in our decision making, but make sure we bring the public with us to achieve these great future communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Really interesting, and I think you and I have had this conversation. So I went to, in fact, RHQ, and Bill will know where our RHQ is, on Slough Trading Estate. For me to get there from where I live would be a train, a bus, 2 trains, and then a hefty walk afterwards. Whereas were it directly in Slough Town Centre, I could probably catch a train straight there. So it's an interesting sort of dichotomy. I could use public transport, but it would take me hours and hours. And similarly, even Winner's Triangle, which is just down the road, without a car, with a car, takes me 18 minutes. But on public transport, it would take me an hour and a half to get there. Again, a bus and 2 trains to get around. So a city centre, I suppose, makes good sense if you've got good transport, public transport links into it. And like you say, with vehicles, younger people may not necessarily want a vehicle. If you live in a flat, you can't charge a vehicle. If you live, somewhere without a driveway, charging is quite difficult. So public transport is key to it. Does it impact on what Stantec do as a business if we're not building out of town business parks any longer?
I think we'll always be, as I say, our mantra is to build with community in mind. So there'll be there'll be an evolution of spaces and design and places. And I think that'll happen throughout history. We will even our towns and cities that are relatively new will evolve, will change, needs will change, technologies will change. So there'll be always the need for good design advice and input. So we're actually, part of our mantra is to cut carbon. So it may be counterintuitive, but the first thing we say is, do you need to build anything? Can you do something better with what you've got before you jump straight to building your shiny new toy? Do you need a big road? Well, no, usually you don't. There will be consequences of that. But actually what we do is we take what we call the places first approach, where we scenario map out what all the possible futures might look like. So we say, okay, you could build a road. Here's the ultimate outcome. You'll promote driving. It'll be more car dependent. We could go down this route, though. We could start to remanage and reuse that road space for other things. We could start to design the way places work, and we could change the mix of uses. So you can do most things locally, and not have to travel. The other thing that, you know, other businesses are adopting is sort of local hubs. So rather than you having to travel to Slough, could you create a community hub, a community workspace hub where you've effectively got everything you need, but you don't have to be sat at home, you're interacting with other people. So that there are all sorts of potential options and solutions here that I think, I mean, there's plenty of work still to be done. We're a long way away from where we need to be. But, you know, we want to move towards not just net zero, but a more equitable society. So we've got to think about the people that, as you say, they won't be able to have cars, own cars and charge cars up. So we've got to make it easier for them to get around. And this is where technology might help. We have much lower cost now, demand responsive transport systems being rolled out, where you will have an on-demand call-up service. You won't have to wait half an hour for your next bus to get to one point and then another 10 minutes for the next bus. You'll just call up a demand responsive service that takes people from your area to where you need to go. So technology is also going to help us solve some of these challenges going forwards.
Thank you, Scott. I think that Oxford Buses, I think, are trialling mobility as a service options. So yeah, like a taxi, but with lots of other people in it. Thank you very much for your talk earlier. Indika, I'm going to hand over to you if that's okay.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, and thanks, Scott, for all those insightful comments. I'm Indika. Yes, it's Indika. That's how we pronounce it. It's part of my name, which the other part is quite long. And I'm from SGS. I head the sustainability or ESG services division in the knowledge affiliate within SGS. SGS is a large-scale organization into various services, and then we have been there since 1978. Most of you may not have heard about us, but then we are present in quite a few sectors, and we are 93,000 strong around the world. Our main focuses are into testing, certification, verification on various global standards such as ISO, UCAS, various accredited standards. Building on what Scott and Sarah spoke about, I think the last 3 years have been years of paradigm change. And I think that after the industrial revolution itself, this decade that we are in, will be known or recognized later on in history as a decade that changed the way that we went about business and about living life. And it's quite fitting, the fact that it's after 2 centuries that we are facing such a massive massive change in ordinary life. And in terms of the catalyst that supports this change, I think the fact that we are connected, and then the information availability, the internet, and the technology has played a major role, just like Scott mentioned. So, and to come to think of it, more time you spend meeting online itself adds to the technology, especially in terms of artificial intelligence, the system development, in terms of more complex algorithms, which would analyze our behaviors, analyze the way we make decisions, the way we speak, and technology would grow faster during the coming years. I'm sorry about that. I was just following my thoughts and speaking them out loud. Coming back to our topic, I think we are now in a transitional period. The pandemic in itself was a lot to take in. Now we are out of it and going about life with few things we picked up during the pandemic and isolation and all those red tapes. And the period we are going through is more of a corrective period, I would say. This is not the end. These are means to an end, and we are going through that the period of change. I would take the indicators we have within the society at the moment, the economy and in personal lives, and stand still for a bit and try to analyze it all and try to predict what to expect during the next 3 to 5 years. and do the same thing after 5 years maybe, because the dynamisms we face today doesn't allow us the luxury of planning for 10 or 15 years as we used to do earlier. So when you take it all in, currently we have had some economic growth, social system tribulation, or eruption, and going back to a certain normality, as we were let out of the limitations imposed by the pandemic and the surrounding culture of fear. We see employment at a high rate, moderate growth in the economy, high inflation. There's an energy crisis due to global conflict, high cost and returns for, and means high cost and returns for real estate development as well at the moment, and prices are at an all-time high. What we should do is we should contemplate, though, if there is stability to depend on for the short and the medium term at least. It looks as if the fiscal and the monetary market pressure has had an impact on the political stability as well. And I actually prefer not to talk about possible recession and economic constrictions. The thought in itself makes me cringe. However, there are some implications to consider. Better prepared people and organizations would reduce the negative impact and further contribution towards a downward spiral. So currently there are ample opportunities for employment, and it's employee-led market, I would say. You have your new recruits demanding work from home. We are managing our time and meetings around school pickup times and other personal appointments. So there's quite a lot of flexibility in our employment as well. If the employment rate receded for some reason during the short or the medium term, would this be the same? It's a question that needs to be asked. Are organizations going to be able to derive maximum efficiency in a time of economic downturn from remote working? It's a highly debatable thought. I would be met with some opposition. These questions have brought in some compromise with most organizations now opting for a mixed week, so 3 days office and 2 days from home, and likewise, and different formats for different industries. This all could change due to uncertainty. After all, organization resilience is a mandatory piece within the Sustainable Development School of Thought. An organization has to be in existence for social and economic well-being. So that's a mandatory part of the whole puzzle. How about energy costs during winter, for example? If both partners in a family work from home during the winter, all 5 days, the cost of energy for that household would increase by about 30 to 35%. Can this be compensated by the employer, and can it be a compromise between the other conveniences that we enjoy? Would more people start asking to work from an office, or opting to work from office in such a situation? Most organizations have given up their leasehold properties, which had been there with them for years, and that's because staff tended to work from home, and then the offices were empty, so there was no reason for them to maintain them. In its place, we have shared spaces, hot desks, which will continue to develop as we go on. Would there be a sudden increase in demand for this type of facilities in the future, more than what we are experiencing now, because of certain economic conditions? So that's something to be something that we should dwell on as well. And more people have moved out of cities and sometimes to regional hubs or rural regional areas. If they were requested to return to work, would they comply, or would they find employment within their localities, because they're used to that locality now, and they like maybe they've gone back to their hometown from the metro centers, and would that add to the talent and the experience pool available for those regional centers? So those are considerations, and can these regional centers be the next economic revival hotspots, and can it support the whole economy as a whole? And are enough infrastructure being invested into facilitate this form of a property growth in those rural or regional centers? So there are a lot of ifs and considerations when you sit back and dwell on it, and there are endless possibilities that we could arrive at. Anyway, what should you do to be at the forefront of this change as an industry leader in property? One, of course, there should be more technology and collaborative approach in building planning, even for residential purposes. better, for example, better actual backgrounds that are, that would be visible to your colleagues when you appear on Teams. It can cheer up the whole team for that day. On the other hand, more and more companies are committing to carbon neutrality and net zero goals, more sustainable development alignment, more ESG reporting, and more ESG strategic thinking and frameworks coming into place. And if you plan ahead and include, for an example, life cycle analysis for the material that you use in your upscaling or the new build, there would be information available up front for whoever is taking space from you, and not only on scope 1 and 2, but also for scope 3 emissions. So you are getting yourself ready for the transition, and then you're supporting with information for potential buyers and potential leaseholders. How about aspects such as waste disposal? Have you signed up a service provider that subscribes to, for example, zero landfill and recycling effort-led programs? Is that on the cards? Are you increasing the GHG emissions or adding to the traffic issues in the city center due to the placement of your property? How about encouraging better modes of transportation? Are there enough facilities for people to use different sources of transportation that are more environmental friendly? Is the location of your project supporting the sustainable development objectives as a whole? Have you considered that before during your planning period? So these are questions that can add to your resilience of your business, and then also to your competitive advantage when you compete in the market. How can various energy management or social governance frameworks and various structures available support your projects to be supportive of the sustainability targets of your clients? So these are valid points that should be prioritized during the new normal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Indika. Really interesting, yeah, and you covered a very broad range, and I do think this is a subject worth following up with. So I'll be in touch later on in the year around ESG particularly. Do you think that we're more agile now as businesses? Technology has obviously come on leaps and bounds just in a very, very short period. But do you think, whilst we can all use Zoom and Teams and various other things that make me cry a little bit sometimes, various platforms, do you think that, well, they're going to be with us, obviously, forever, but do you see a paradigm shift towards that means of communication, or do you think people still crave working in an office, going to see clients?
Yeah, I think so. I think we were quite taken up with this new concept of remote working, and then I think about 6 months ago we started to correct ourselves a bit, because we, as Scott mentioned, like human beings, we want social interaction, and that's something that actually helps a healthy society and social well-being. So you need to interact with others, and also it something that I find in my personal life. I prefer to work from office, because it's easier for me to have a work-life balance rather than basing everything from home. So even though my company asks me to work from home, what I do is I rent a desk space in a city center facility, and I come every day and I work from that facility. So for me, it has been a change, and then it has helped in terms of organizing myself, because we are more into a tech savvy, and then more applications have come in that has helped us to organize our work. But I think yes, it's going to help in a certain way. For example, there have been such a lot of systems, such a lot of technology that has been developed during those 1-2 years, which are now helping us actually to get rid of quite a lot of waste. Quite a lot of, for example, printing. We don't print anything now. Our organization doesn't have any printing at all. Everything is based on based on the computer platform. So for example, these have done quite a lot of, they have had a major positive impact on the way we lived life, and that's going to have an impact on our personal lives as well, and personal within personal life as well. We don't we are adopting some of those technologies for our use, for an example, to reach out to loved ones who are far away. You don't buy a plane ticket and then go and visit them. Nowadays, you connect on a platform such as WhatsApp, and then you can see them every day. So it does, and it has changed quite a way the way we go about life. But in terms of businesses, there is a balance that needs to be struck. I think like we had a lot of concepts. For an example, organizational culture. There was a lot of training. There was a lot of development, which happened face to face, which had a certain amount of physical contact. And I think those aspects are still valid, because after all, we are human. We are not machines.
Thank you, Indika. And it's very true. We learn from those around us, don't we, at the end of the day. I'm going to hand over now to David, and you might be able to answer the question, is this going to have a major impact on real estate values? I don't know. I'll leave that to you, but I'll let you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm David Jones. I'm Managing Director of Evans Jones Limited. We're a multidisciplinary practice of planners, quantity surveyors, building consultants and disabled access consultants operating from Cheltenham, Reading and London. So I speak and assist many developers, landowners, tenants, etc. So perhaps very much at the sharp end of delivery. I think from my experience, I probably refer back to Bill Clinton's election campaign, "It's the economy, stupid." Everything is in a capitalist society related to money and viability. And I spend a lot of my time dealing with viability issues, discussing with developers, local authorities and the like. We have aspirations in terms of net zero, obviously the climate change emergency, and I'm seeing through planning, more and more local authorities now adopt specific policies seeking to ensure that developments do meet sustainability criteria across the board. And I'm totally supportive of that. From a developer point of view, developers will build and deliver within the sort of rules and technological requirements applicable at the time of build, and it is relatively few brave developers who will exceed that unless they see a return for it. So it's a slightly depressing message, but developers are businesses ultimately and are there to make money. I see developers probably criticised too often for the greedy developer doing whatever. Well, they're a business, and like any business, they will operate within the administrative and legal system set for them, and build for whatever they believe will create a return. I don't think we can necessarily criticise that part of the market. What we do have is a system which is disjointed. Much of the sort of sustainability agenda is sought to be delivered through planning and continual tweaking of the planning system. I say that with a vested interest, as I'm a planner, and I'm at the sharp end of having to deal with formerly Mr. Gove, yet again tweaking with the system and trying to impose change through planning. For me, I think that's the wrong way. I think we have building regulations which can deliver that change nationally rather than a rather piecemeal approach through local authorities either adopting or not adopting, or adopting different policies. At the moment we see the London plan, which is fairly recently adopted, have very stringent BREEAM standards, sustainability standards, water use standards, parking standards, etc. All very good, but you get outside London and it's a very mixed bag, from nothing to everything in between. So that makes it very difficult for developers to understand. In terms of getting back to the subject perhaps a little, the future of offices and where that is going. For me, I talk a lot about sort of repurposing the high street and where and how we can repurpose our high streets to make them fit for purpose. And for me, I think the high street offices, living, entertainment are indivisible. You can't look at one in isolation and hope that that will solve all of our issues. They all have their part to play. In Reading, we're seeing some great developments in the build to rent model, and even John Lewis, who are looking to change their delivery model, so 40% of their income is derived through non-retail means. They're redeveloping some of their premises for build to rent, either redeveloping or building above some of their premises within London. There is one in Reading which they are redeveloping for that purpose. So that's a really exciting, different use of existing buildings. And it's entirely sustainable, or certainly more sustainable than demolishing and rebuilding. So I think that's a good positive aspect, and there's lots of new build again within Reading for build to rent, as there is elsewhere. Now that has the advantage of bringing people right into town centres, and the mantra I often preach is you bring people and they will spend. So it's not necessarily about retail. Retail needs to be right, and retail needs to be adapt to the new world order, and embrace and cooperate with the online market as far as they are able. But it is about people, and I'm seeing many more developments redevelop town centre buildings for non-retail uses often. So for offices, co-working spaces has been one of the great successes, I think, sort of during and post-pandemic, and I think others I've spoken today have commented upon that as a different means of office occupation to the traditional everyone has their own desk and occupies 20 meters squared per office space, whatever. So those are interesting changes. I don't think we will go back to the office space we had pre-pandemic. Change had to happen. I looked at an office building, it's a call centre last week. It was 30,000+ square feet of office space. There were 2 people working in it. They've got 3 years left on their lease, and they were seeking advice as to what they do with that building to repurpose it. Again, planning is unfortunately slow to change. We have many policies within many areas that protect employment uses, so it does mean that diversifying or repurposing those buildings does require quite a few planning hurdles to step through, but that will happen, and that's part of what I do to sometimes force that change, perhaps against a policy tide. Say high street indivisible from offices, living, entertainment. I often say that what has happened during the pandemic, certainly from the high street environment, turned what was already a slow bleed into a hemorrhage. And I think that hemorrhage has been patched to a degree. There's still a lot of work to do, and we can walk around a lot of towns and cities, and they still feel quite depressing places because of the number of voids. The government are trying to do something about that with forcing landlords with properties that have been vacant for longer than 12 months to reuse them. Whether that gets through the levelling up bill, we're yet to see, but it's certainly there front and centre at the moment. I suppose my cynical head would say landlords often find ways, and the commercial market often find ways of circumventing those sort of requirements. But hey ho, I think it's a good intent. Interestingly, it was a policy proposed by Mr. Corbyn at the last election. So if anybody's reusing anything, it's the current Conservative Party who are taking perhaps Labour manifesto pledges and rebadging them as their own. But that's just an amusing aside, I think. Everyone talks about the impact that online has had on the market. For me, having something delivered to your home is not very sustainable, Scott probably could come in and tell me what the cost of home delivery is, but I know it's that last 3 miles, 3 or 4 miles, the delivery, which has the major cost. But we are seeing a change. Fuel price increases are changing that market. The cost of delivery has increased significantly, and we're now seeing big online retailers look again at, particularly the cost of returns. And I think that's where we will see a big sea change in the next, 12 months or so. And I think it won't take much for the market to perhaps shift back to the high street. And that probably doesn't make any economic sense, because if you're paying a few pounds for a return, it's probably still cheaper than driving into town, taking something back and parking. But I think psychologically it will have a major impact. And some retailers are, where they do have both an online and physical presence, are requiring that items that are returned back to a physical shop, which I think is quite exciting, because that brings people back into the town centre. If they get something refunded, then there's probably more chance they're going to spend money within the town centre. So, I think, it's the economy, yes. I think economic drivers historically have always been the big ones that invoke the major change. And I think with the cost of fuel currently, I think that is going to invoke a lot of change. It's going to drive people back into town centres. We can bring our office employers back into town centres. That's great. They will go and they will spend, and that encourages retailers to come back in and to invest. As to the future of the office overall, yes, I think it's going to be a blended environment. It's going to be, co-working space. It's going to be that 3-2 model or something akin to that. I think some of these bits have got unforeseen implications. I know working in Cheltenham, as I do, where I'm recruiting, we are seeing a lot of pressure from a much wider geographic area now. So London practices will seek to employ staff, ask them to go into the office 2 or 3 times a month, but still offer a London loading. So, outside London, that is making it very difficult for employers. So I've covered quite a lot there, Sarah. Hopefully that covers something of what you wanted from me today, and very happy to take questions. Thank you.
It absolutely does cover everything, and I jotted down a few notes. Co-working has always been a positive thing from many of my clients, because it encourages different companies to work together. So spin-outs often come from their hubs and what have you. Is it difficult on the planning front, one question from me, to kind of switch back? Because I remember years ago, well, I don't know, all years have merged into one recently, but a few years ago, lots of office places, I think around Newbury, because again, I can only speak for local development, permitted development allowed somebody who owned an office block to turn it all into flats. Is it viable or as easy for somebody, maybe not John Lewis, because they're a big player, but if I owned a shop in a high street, could I turn what used to be my storage space into a flat above? Is that as easy to do? Or indeed a retail space?
Yeah,
around the other way.
2013, the government first brought in permitted development for office to residential conversion. That was, contested by a number of local authorities who took it all the way through to the Supreme Court and lost. So, around Reading and Berkshire, they were particularly anti that form of conversion. But it did create, hundreds of thousands of new homes. Not all of them very good homes, unfortunately. The legislation was so badly written that it allowed dwellings to be created without natural light, which is abhorrent, really. So those errors have been corrected. You can still convert commercial premises which are vacant to residential use, although there is now a size limitation. So it is not a complete carte blanche, and they must have been vacant for 3 months prior to an application. So prior to that, it was, I say, a free-for-all, really. So any office building could have been converted, whether occupied or not occupied. So the government have tried to address that, but we do now have a new, relatively new Class E within town centres, which does allow for massive range of uses within the town centre, away from not just retail but professional services, residential, restaurants, etc., without any requirement to change the use, and of course supported by the ability for restaurateurs to provide marquees in their grounds, again without planning permission. That provision was brought in through COVID and has now been made permanent. So in answer to your question, yes, it is still available. There are far more checks and balances now, and a restriction on the size of building which can be converted.
Thank you, David. Can I just briefly bring in Bill Gornall-King here? Bill, I hope you don't mind me picking on you, because I know you've recently retired, but you were town centre, professional services, legal firm, right in the middle of Reading. What's your experience of? Does that aid staff? Does that detract from their work?
Well, it's a mixed picture, and I think every business needs to reflect on its objectives and what it wants to achieve. So, for a professional services business, law firm, perhaps the biggest issue that the firm faced during the pandemic was its engagement with its junior employees in terms of developing them and allowing them to develop their professional network internally within the firm, and also to learn, as so much learning in the professional services environment is by osmosis, by seeing, hearing, listening, and receiving instantaneous feedback and informal feedback. So on top of that, sort of the water cooler, as Scott was saying, humans want to interact. There's actually a sort of business imperative, particularly for younger people, to develop. You can't do everything on a flat screen. You've got to be in a room with people from time to time. So my old firm is certainly has moved towards a hybrid working model, with its lawyers working from home but coming into the office in teams and Teams meetings. So creating a collaborative environment and actually making perhaps better use of time in the office, rather than as Scott was mentioning at the outset, the presenteeism model of working. But obviously there are challenges, just as Indika mentioned and David, in terms of the challenges that regional businesses face, particularly geographically proximate to London and the draw of London and London salaries available for young people not to have to travel into London every day with huge season ticket costs. And actually that was an interesting feature for the firm, because it suddenly realized that probably about 50 or 60% of its professional staff commuted into Reading on a daily basis, and therefore were carrying the overhead cost of that commuting, which suddenly during lockdown they were freed from, which in some cases, I understand, created a reluctance to return to the office, and the apparent taking of a pay cut to be forced to go to work. Although I hasten to add that Boys Turner did not force its employees in any way to come to work. It is more around encouragement for them to meet with their colleagues and interact. Yeah, that's the experience that Boys Turner had, particularly during the pandemic, and is reflecting currently on what its space needs are going forward and how people will work within the office environment.
Thank you very much, Bill. And you do have lovely offices there. You can see right into Forbury Gardens, which and the Abbey Ruins, which I'm
indeed
delighted about. So thank you for your input there. John Horwood, I think we've got a question from you, please, if you wouldn't mind unmuting. I can't see you on my screen, but if you wouldn't mind shouting out.
Morning, everyone. Thank you guys for your thoughts so far. Really interesting. And obviously being from Core Office Group, doing workplace strategy, design and fit out, it's pretty obvious that I'm an advocate of the office and the workspace, but not in the traditional 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, as we've already discussed. That the ways of that working have changed. As we just touched on, the difficulties of businesses with regards to mentoring, but also I read a piece last year, tail end of last year, from the BBC about the proximity rule and how younger employees, either of age or more junior in their career paths, actually, how do they impress senior business individuals without that, as Bill was alluding to there, without that proximity to their peers, but more importantly their seniors, to showcase not just via stats that are visible online, but showcase their work ethic and their culture. What we've found is, it was a journey businesses were on already, but the pandemic, if anything, has accelerated and showcased the need for the office and the workspace to be a home and not just a building. Ironically, we talk about working from home, but actually that a firm or an organisation's office should be their home, where they can build culture and best practice. And where the leaders can be in and amongst their staff. And what challenges do we envision if we are remote or in co-working spaces, in the absence of that ability to build culture and be in those collaborative and relationship circles with our peers, juniors or seniors?
Thanks, John. That's a very good point. Do any of my speakers want to hop in on that thought, the loss of the office culture for good or bad? And if you're only doing 2 days a week and your co-workers are in on a different 2 days a week, how does that work? Scott, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, and Bill's right that the osmosis is the key here. It's not just the formal meetings where you come in for a project meeting and you meet your team. It's that interaction, and we have, as I say, we've introduced a requirement or an understanding that you're expected to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week, and that's spread across the week. So we monitor and manage that just to see how it's going. But we actually did find that the younger teams wanted to come in. They wanted to be in the office space. They didn't have such good home space as those who've been around a lot longer with a study or whatever. So they wanted that space. They wanted that work environment. They wanted that experience. And we said, well, it's not fair on them to not have managers in with them, because we can interact with them over Teams and send them emails and give them instructions, but that's not the same as being there as a mentor, a guide, or just hearing what they're talking about, and hearing what other teams are talking about. And so it's not, there's obviously the talk around the coffee machine, which is great, but it's that buzz of an office. And you hear something going on and you think, oh, I had that issue the other day as well. Let me join this conversation. So that is really missed. And we do, you know, we've said we know you miss it as the developing teams, and we want to make sure that we create that buzz again. So it's really important. And I think that's where, you know, stories of the end of the office, I think, well, that's dreadful if we're going to all work in metaverse and never actually see each other and get these interactions, because I think we'll lose talent. Because the other bit to me is that the pandemic, all the good stuff we learned from it, one of the things was people didn't feel like they had a home. You know, when we used to all go to work, it was a sort of second home. You had a community there, you had friends there. But what we've seen, in not just in our industry, in lots of other industries, is a lot more mobility of staff looking for other jobs, just because they've got time on their hands and they're sat at home more than anything else. And you're not giving them anything special because they're not coming in to get that special environment. So I think all of those factors are critical to the skills, the training, and the retention of staff.
And also adding on to that, Sarah, if you have time, it's just to add on to what John mentioned. The organizational culture has been something, you know, which is even up to date. We discuss in management circles that it's like an invisible force that keeps the team together, and then during difficult times you pull together because of the organizational culture that you cultivated amongst your team. So it's something which is difficult to build when you're remote working, and during difficult times, for example, an economic downturn, this would become a very important factor that organizations will strive to redevelop or rebuild, and that would mean coming together at least for a limited amount of time every day or every week. Thank you.
I think just coming, Sarah, we should not forget the mental health benefits as well of working together. You know, I've certainly seen, you know, during the pandemic, you know, with some of my own staff, that they really found it difficult, that lack of interaction. And everybody's different, but you know, some characters do need that physical interaction with people, and you know, that you can't replace that, whatever you do. All that said, I speak to some IT consultants, and you know, they consistently work remotely, and they will have you know, a video communication system open all day between a team. And they will chat as if they're in an office. So they're a little, you know, a bit more cynical, but perhaps they've been used to it for a longer period, and they feel, you know, remote working works fine for them. So, you know, I think it's incumbent upon us as managers and business owners to look at our systems and management techniques, and, you know, ensure that we you know, adapt as well. But I think mental health is certainly a biggie for me, that you know, getting people together, you know, you can see where people are struggling in a physical environment, which is far harder in a virtual environment. So, you know, one can address it and put an arm around someone and, you know, do whatever you need to do. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thank you. I mean, it's such a broad subject, isn't it? Even when I worked for Barclays Bank, I worked from home with a fax machine. Remember those people? And my PA would fax me what he'd done during the day, and I'd fax him a list of what he should do the next day. And I did struggle with it a bit, because there was I did actually have a study then, but you never quite felt away from it. Similarly here, everything's on my dining room table. So unlike work, I don't get to kind of shut the door and walk entirely away from it. Having said that, on the employment side, they probably get a good couple of hours extra, because I can switch my laptop on at 8 o'clock in the morning, whereas normally I'd be on the road at 7:30. Equally, I'll still be working at 5:30, 6 in the evening, whereas had I left the office, I'd be out of that door at 5 o'clock. So it's an odd balance, you know, for working environment and productivity. Did I need to spend £2 a litre on fuel to drive, you know, do the 55-mile round trip to the office? Possibly not. And spend 3 hours a day looking at other people's tail lights? Possibly not. It would have been better spent, you know, sat here doing what I do and doing this, which is why I'm at home today doing this. So it's been really interesting, and I think it's a much broader subject than we've only really scraped the surface of it today, and it's probably something to be picked up again, a further conversation when we know who our new Prime Minister might be. I think everybody's keen to get back to the news at the moment. So I'm going to draw this to a close. I'll share, if everybody's happy to, if we haven't got, have we got any more questions from the audience? Because I'm going to close it. I know people are kind of itching to go away, but I will share everybody's contact details with our speakers, if that's okay with you guys, from the chat box. Any more comments? Any other business? No, we're all saying good, good, good. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I will see you. We haven't got any events coming up in August. Just as a wrap up, I've got an engineering event and it's live, and our next property event will be face to face, I hope. Somewhere I need to put that in the diary, so just keep over the website and you'll see all the details. Engineering event in September over at Culham, for any of you in that space. Just keep reading your emails from us, because you'll get a lot of useful information through there. The quarterly economic survey starts again. We've got a follow-up live meeting if anybody wants to come along to that. I think it's next Tuesday, off the top of my head. And then please do fill in the next QES that comes your way. It's really important and shapes our work. So thank you, everybody. And nice comments coming through, which our speakers can see. So thank you so much. I'll call it quits there. Sarah, you can switch us off now. Thank you.